For those who come here seeking God, may God go with you. For those who come embracing life, may life return your affections. And for those who come to seek a path, may a way be found, and the courage to take it step by step. So our sacred text today is, they're the lyrics of a song. And the song forms the basis of the sermon today. And the song was picked by someone who was the winning bidder at our service auction. They got to choose the sermon topic. And so these are the words from the song Highwayman by Jimmy Webb. I briefly thought about singing it to you, but I didn't want Johnny Cash to be rolling over in his grave. Highwayman. I was a highwayman, along the coach roads I did ride, with sword and pistol by my side. Many a young maid lost her baubles to my trade, many a soldier shed his lifeblood on my blade. The bastards hung me in the spring of 25, but I am still alive. I was a sailor, I was born upon the tide, and with the sea I did abide. I sailed a schooner round the Horn to Mexico. I went aloft and furled the mainsail in a blow, and when the yards broke off, they said that I got killed, but I am living still. I was a dam builder across the river deep and wide, where steel and water did collide. A place called Boulder on the wild Colorado. I slipped and fell into the wet concrete below. They buried me in that great tomb that knows no sound, but I am still around. I'll always be around and around and around. I'll fly a starship across the universe divide, and when I reach the other side, I'll find a place to rest my spirit if I can. Perhaps I may become a highwayman again, or I may simply be a single drop of rain. But I will remain, and I'll be back again and again and again. Auction sermons are funny things. When you offer to preach on a topic of someone's choice, you never know what you're going to get. It might be a request to unpack some particularly vexing part of the Bible, or to decipher or interpret a poem. It might be that you're asked to delve into a subject that has little or nothing to do with religion or faith, but that genuinely troubles the person. Sometimes the winning bidder gives you a whimsical topic just to challenge you to make something meaningful out of it. In the case of our topic today, our auction winner sent me a link to that Jimmy Webb song, The Highwayman, that you heard earlier. And she said, "This is a song that stuck with me when I was in high school for reasons I didn't understand then. I heard it again early last fall, and I think there's a sermon in there." Well, let's hope so. "Welcome to the most haunted inn in Charleston," said the woman behind the desk as we checked in. My ears perked up when I heard this. I hadn't selected this particular place to stay because of its reputations for ghosts and things that go bump in the night, but the thought of finally actually personally encountering a ghost gave me a little jolt, a little thrill. Irene, my wife, not so much. I saw her face go pale when the bellman helped us up to our room, when he explained that we were sandwiched between two of the, quote, most active rooms in the inn. On one side was what was called the gentleman ghost. This ghost was known to be a bit of a ladies' man, who often climbed into the bed with those who stayed in the room. Now, the problem was that this ghost, we were told, consists of only the head and torso of a man, because it was a Civil War soldier who had been cut in two by cannon fire on the Charleston Battery. On the other side of us, the bellman explained, was a little less friendly ghost. It was the specter of a troubled man who had flung himself off the roof of the building, which resulted in his death more than a century earlier. As soon as the bellman left the room, Irene turned to me and said, "We need a signal." I said, "A signal? What for?" "For when we see a ghost." Okay, I played along with her, and she came up with this elaborate plan that she was just going to jab me in the ribs. That was her signal, to wake me up if she saw a ghost. I said, "Okay, that sounds good to me," and I was sort of patronizing and humoring her as I studied a map looking for the local barbecue joint we wanted to go to. So on the first night, it was I who witnessed something strange. Around midnight, I was wakened to a sound that I can only describe as that sound when you're staying in a hotel and it's the last night of your stay and they slip a bill under your door. There's sort of that little whooshing sound. There's some of you nodding. It was that sort of whooshing sound. Woke me up. And I was really excited. I wanted to see a ghost. So I was wide awake. The adrenaline was pumping for like half an hour. And of course, nothing else happened. So I went back to sleep. And in the morning, though, I went into the bathroom. And the bathroom had a small window next to the sink. And it had shutters that closed over the window. And at night, those shutters were closed. They were down. They were pulled down. But in the morning, one of them was up. And when you moved the shutters, it made that whooshing sound. Now, I made the mistake of telling Irene about this. And by the way, she gave me permission to tell this story, and the one I'll tell later. But I told Irene about this, and she said, "Don't forget our signal. Don't forget our signal." I said, I got it. So the second night we turned in and turned out the lights, and I was sound asleep right away. And I had one of the best night's sleep of my life. But when we got up in the morning, Irene was bleary-eyed and mad. I asked her what was wrong, and she told me that in the middle of the night she heard a sound that sounded like a glass being moved around on the porcelain sink in the bathroom. And she heard it several times. And, of course, she was jabbing me in the ribs. She got nothing. And so she laid terrified under the covers, waiting for the gentleman ghost to join us in bed. And she admitted, "I'm not sure why I was under the covers, because, of course, a ghost could just come up from under the bed." But nothing else happened beside that. So she was mad at me for sleeping through all of that activity. So I wonder, do you believe in ghosts? Do you believe in ghosts? Do you believe in the possibility of ghosts? I believe in the possibility of ghosts. And I think that at least my belief in the possibility of ghosts speaks to my interest, my desire that there be something more than just this life. And I think a lot of us share that sentiment, that we want there to be something more than just this brief time on this earth that we've been allotted. Can this really be all that there is? I mean, if we are really made of star stuff, as we've been told, why can't we, like the light from a distant star that's been extinguished, still shine on through eternity? We long for life to go on. I'm going to take a brief pause because I see Xander. Is that Xander? Diana, I think maybe? Yeah, Xander's at the door. We long for life to go on, for more of it, with all its ups and downs, all our successes and failures, all those glasses of water that we have to hold and hold until our arms are aching, all of that. There are very few of us who would not choose to have more of life, or perhaps another life, and another, and another. Our conceptions of the soul, the spirit, reincarnation, and heaven all speak to this desire. According to Rabbi Erwin Kula, the yearning to understand and even transcend death is, as he said, one of the most noble defining aspects of our humanness. And I think the lyrics of The Highwayman speaks to this basic human human yearning. As good Christians, our Universalist forebears believed that our spirits would survive our death and be united with God in heaven, and that this applied to everyone, not just the righteous among us. So like the highwayman who lived on in many lives despite the fact that he was a thief and a villain, Universalists held that everyone eventually gets to heaven. That's the origin of the name of so many of our Unitarian Universalist churches when they're called All Souls. The idea is all souls are redeemed, all souls will go to heaven. Our rational minds are conflicted in considering life after death or the spirit world or the possibility of reincarnation. Death, of course, to all appearances, is final. We know the biology. When the heart stops and the blood stops flowing to our brain, our consciousness ends and our cells begin to die and decay. Death of the body is a scientific fact, provable by experience and by measurement. And yet, what about the life force? The life force that began mysteriously at the moment of conception, or perhaps that even existed before then. There are people who say that the spirit of a child actually chooses its parents. The spirit of a child actually chooses its parents. It sounds a little far-fetched to me, but can we prove that that's wrong? Of course not. And while we can explain scientifically what happens when a sperm and an egg unite, how the chromosomes combine and the cells begin to divide, scientists have been unable to tell us where life itself comes from, what the life force that animates us actually is. And so we wonder, is there something more? Something before? Something after? One of the highest grossing movies of 2014, bringing in more than $90 million, was a film called Heaven is for Real. The movie is based on a best-selling book written in 2010 by a young boy who claims to have died and gone to heaven during a near-death experience. The fact that the book spent weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, that it was the best-selling paperback of 2011, and that it was made into a major motion picture, belies our deep desire for proof that there's something beyond the life we live and breathe and see and feel. We're fascinated, at least I'm fascinated, by accounts of near-death experiences, of people going toward the light, of seeing the faces of long-dead ancestors. Just a few weeks ago, I read about a Catholic priest who was dead for 48 minutes, the story said, before he was revived. And he said he went to heaven and he encountered God. Now, the Catholic Church was a little bit upset about this because he reported that God was a woman. That's what he encountered when he was dead. Yearning for the eternal life of the Spirit or for reincarnation or some other form of life everlasting is a natural response to our grief and loss when a loved one dies, and to the fear of our own death. It, too, is a response to how hard this life can sometimes be. If you listen to the old spirituals sung by slaves, those songs speak of a happier time, an easier time in the future, in heaven, after this life and everything that they endured. Either way, a belief in something after this life is a source of consolation to many. I'm always impressed when I see on the news when after some great tragedy has happened, when they're interviewing someone who's lost somebody suddenly, and that person says, "I know they're in heaven." And they just have this incredible, intense faith in that, and they believe that so much that they find great consolation in that. And I long for that kind of certainty and that kind of faith, and I wonder whether you do too. The highwayman speaks to our need to find a comfort such as this, telling us that we will come around again and again and again that the end of this life is not the end of life itself. In his book Yearnings, Rabbi Erwin Kula invites us to be pragmatic when considering questions about what happens when we die. He writes, "Our responses to death do not have to be intellectually sound or consistent. Rather, they need to be existentially comforting or enlightening." Let me read that again. Our responses to death do not have to be intellectually sound or consistent. Rather, they need to be existentially comforting or enlightening. Wow, that makes a lot of sense to me, and it gives me permission to believe what I need to believe about what happens after we die. Back when I was in seminary, we all had to take a class called Systematic Theology. Systematic Theology. So Systematic Theology challenged us to sort out what we believed about the nature of God, about the nature of humanity, and about the nature of the world or nature. And this class required us to develop a belief system that was internally consistent. We couldn't believe one thing about the nature of God that conflicted with our understanding about the nature of humanity and the world. The good news is that we're not in systematic theology. And this is what Erwin Kula is telling us. We could be the most left-brained, rational person in everything else and still have complete faith that there's heaven and there's something after we die. We could be the most deeply spiritual person, connected to spirit and the divine in our lives, and still believe that death is nothingness. Or we could be somewhere in between. It doesn't matter that it fits in with other aspects of ourselves. As long as it provides us comfort and consolation, we can believe what we need to believe happens when we or a loved one dies. There is no test. We don't need to justify it to anyone. It just needs to work for us. Shortly after Irene's mother died, Irene was sitting in her parents' home, and she looked out the window. Up on the hillside behind the house, she saw a doe grazing in the grass and some other deer wandering through the woods. But her eyes locked on to the doe's eyes for what seemed like forever. It was probably several minutes. They connected. And then the doe looked away to the herd that was receding and looked back to Irene and looked back and forth several times and then wandered off into the woods with the rest of the herd. Irene took this as a message from her mother who loved deer and used to love to see the deer in the woods. And it brought Irene great comfort in her time of grief. So who are we to argue that this was just a random encounter and not something more? To Irene, it held great meaning and it brought her great solace in her time of need, and that's all that matters. I choose to cast my lot with those whom I call the hopeful skeptics. I first take comfort in the scientific law of the conservation of energy. That law of physics tells us that the total amount of energy in a system remains constant. Or to put this in biblical terms, there is nothing new under the sun. So this physical law goes on to say that while the amount of energy remains constant, the form that energy takes can change, and that energy can be transferred from one object to another. So if this is true, then the energy that is me, that is my life force, will have to live on after my death. What form it takes or what object it's transferred to is anyone's guess. But knowing that my energy will continue in some form is enough for me. Perhaps we all were the highwayman, the sailor, the dam builder. And when I reach the other side, I'll find a place to rest my spirit if I can. Perhaps I may become a highwayman again, or I may simply be a single drop of rain, but I will remain. This day and every day, I wish you peace. Amen.